Hello students, this recording is for the 5th semester core English optional paper on the 20th century for Bachelor of Arts program of Mangalore University. This video lesson is on session 4 of unit 2 titled Wars, Political Upheavals and Intellectual Cross Currents. In this video, we will learn about how war impacted literature, what were the political upheavals. By upheavals, we mean overturning events, and the intellectual crosscurrents, by which we mean what are the thoughts and ideas which formed the core or which influenced the inclinations, the impulses of 20th century. The learning objective is to familiarize you with the context of the frequently used critical concepts in the study of literature to enable note making and concept evaluation. The session outcome is that you get an academic orientation in your response to literature and society and use terms in your responses to literary works. Introduction. Let's quickly recap what we learned in the previous session on how war impacted the British society. The devastating effect of World War II, especially on Britain, was that by the end of the World War II, almost 360,000 British citizens had died as the result of two wars. It was not just British soldiers or the people who fought for the British forces who died, but also the civilians died. The destruction of great sections of London and other cities of England by German bombs. We also learned in the previous session how bombs, especially the air warfare, destroyed cities and not just war fronts. If it were just army, right, it would be in a battlefield. They would wage war against each other, and the war will be restricted to that zone. But with air force coming in, the civilians were highly affected by the devastating consequences of the war. As a result, the British economy, since the cities were destroyed and cities were under siege sometimes, the British economy, since cities also are the centers for trade and commerce and other important activities which sustain economy, the British economy shattered at the end of Second World War. British government, as a result, faced a huge pile of debts which it couldn't really pay back. And place of Great Britain as a superpower was taken over by USA and Russia. So Britain at the end of the Second World War ceased to be the world superpower, and its place was usurped by USA and later to an extent by Russia. And today we know USA remains the most important global superpower. The victory of the Labour Party. If you have already known the British politics, those of you who have studied political science might have known this. So, British society has a two-party system. In India, we have a multi-party system where there are many political parties. In British society, they have two political parties mainly. One is Labour Party, the other one is Conservative Party. Conservative Party represents the interests of the aristocratic upper middle class. Sometimes, not just not middle class, because middle class leanings is more towards the Labour Party, but those people who ruled, who always had the power, people who were important like nobles, lords, dukes, duchess. So all these people were they had the conservative interest. Labour Party came into effect mainly after Industrial Revolution, and there was a particular class formation that happened from working class people. and they unionized. With unions coming into force, the Labour Party also emerged as a challenge. So British society was not a democracy for a long time. It was a monarchy. Monarchy ಅಂದ್ರೆ ಒಂದು ರಾಜ ಅಥವಾ ರಾಣಿ ಆಳುವಂತಹ monarchy. So it is one person's rule. But it's only later that it became almost like in 17th or 18th century that it became a democracy. And once democracy came into effect, the two parties that were Labour parties and Conservative party, so these were two parties with contesting interests. ಅಂದರೆ ಇಬ್ರದ್ದು ಇಂಟ್ರೆಸ್ಟು ಒಂದೇ ಕಡೆ ಮ್ಯಾಚ್ ಆಗ್ತಿರ್ಲಿಲ್ಲ. ಒಂದು ಪಾರ್ಟಿ ವಾಸ್ ಲಾಬಿಂಗ್ ಫಾರ್ the old values and old class structure. The other party, which is Labour Party, had lot of progressive ideas and was in tune with the changing society that the British society was at the end of 18th century. You have people who think that the labor interests need to be safeguarded and they need to be unionized, and the power needs to be taken from the ruling class. They wouldn't willingly give that power to the people who really need it. So unionization in the ಆದಂತಹ formation, mobilization gives rise to Labour Party in Britain. So socialist program, they believed in socialist ideas. So if ruling class ಅಥವಾ conservative party safeguarded capitalist interests, by capitalist interests we mean the capitalist ಅಂದರೆ ಕ್ಯಾಪಿಟಲ್ ಇರುವಂತಹ ಓನರ್ಸ್ ಇರುವಂಥದ್ದು, those who already are wealthy will stay wealthy in that particular model. But with socialist program, it was about ಸಮಾಜವಾದಿ program. ಅಂದರೆ ಅವರ ಮ್ಯಾನಿಫೆಸ್ಟೋ ಅಲ್ಲಿ ಎಲ್ಲರ ಉದ್ಧಾರನೂ ಆಗಬೇಕು. ಇಟ್ಸ್ ನಾಟ್ ಜಸ್ಟ್ only safeguarding interests of those who have money or who are rich. So socialist program by the Labour, after its landslide ಅಂದರೆ ಹ್ಯೂಜ್ ವಿಕ್ಟ್ರಿ, ಅಂದರೆ ತುಂಬ ಡಿಫ್ರೆನ್ಸ್ ಓಟ್ಸ್ ಇದ್ದು, ಈಗ 1,00,000 ಓಟ್ಸಿಂದ ಆಚೆ ಗೆಲ್ತಾರೆ ಈ ಥರ ಎಲ್ಲ ಇರ್ತಾರಲ್ಲ, ದಟ್ ಈಸ್ ಕಾಲ್ಡ್ ಎಸ್ ಲ್ಯಾಂಡ್ ಸ್ಲೈಡ್ ವಿಕ್ಟ್ರಿ. ಅಂದರೆ ಕನ್ಸರ್ವೇಟಿವ್ ಪಾರ್ಟಿ ಡಿಂಟ್ ಹ್ಯಾವ್ ಎ chance in that election in 1945, and Labour Party became successful. It went to form a government and the party remained in power till 1951. So 1951 ವರೆಗೂ ಸಹ ಬ್ರಿಟನ್ನಲ್ಲಿ you see socialist programs. Labour Party played an important role in making Britain a welfare state. Again, for those of you who are political science students know what a welfare state is. For those who do not know, I'll briefly explain what a welfare state is. Welfare state ಅಂದರೆ ಒಂದು ರಾಜ್ಯದ ಕರ್ತವ್ಯ. ಬಿಫೋರ್ ದಿಸ್ ದೆರ್ ವಾಸ್ ದಿಸ್ ಕನ್ಸೆಪ್ಷನ್ ಆಫ್ ಲೆಸೆ ಫೇರ್ ಅಂದರೆ government should interfere in the economic affairs of the country as minimally as possible. That means ಗವರ್ಮೆಂಟ್ ಇಂಟರ್ಫರೆನ್ಸ್ ಇರಲೇ ಕೊಡೋದು, ಫ್ರೀ ಮಾರ್ಕೆಟ್ಗೆ ಜಾಗ ಕೊಡಬೇಕು. ಅಂದರೆ ಯಾರಿಗೆ ದುಡ್ಡು ಇದೆ ಅವ್ರು ಬಂದು ಇನ್ವೆಸ್ಟ್ ಮಾಡೋ ಹಾಗಿರಬೇಕು, ಕಾಮರ್ಸ್ನ ಬಿಲ್ಡ್ ಮಾಡೋ ಹಾಗಿರಬೇಕು, ನಲ್ಲಿ ಫ್ರೀ ಎಂಟ್ರಿ ಇರಬೇಕು. ದಿಸ್ ಈಸ್ ದ ಲೆಸೆ ಫೇರ್ ಪಾಲಿಸಿ ವಿಚ್ ಇಸ್ ಎಕನಾಮಿಕ್ ನಾನ್ ಇಂಟರ್ಫಿಯರೆನ್ಸ್ ಪಾಲಿಸಿ. ಆದರೆ with Labour Party coming into effect, we have the conception of welfare state. Welfare state idea idre government will interfere in economic activities where it is necessary, where it means the general welfare or the welfare of the largest number of people. So largest good anta ಹೇಳ್ತಾರೆ. This is again influenced by J.S. Mill's utilitarian ideal of the greatest good of greatest number. People were assured full employment and public health benefits. ಇಲ್ಲಿ ಲೇಬರ್ ಪಾರ್ಟಿ ಕೇಮ್ ಇನ್ ಟು ಇಫೆಕ್ಟ್ ಆ್ಯಂಡ್ ಅವತ್ತಿನ ಕಾಲದಲ್ಲಿ ಎಂಪ್ಲಾಯ್ಮೆಂಟ್ ಅಥವಾ ಫೈರಿಂಗ್, ಇಂಡಸ್ಟ್ರಿಯಲ್ಲಿ ಕೆಲಸ ಮಾಡ್ತಿದ್ದಂಥ ಎಷ್ಟೋ ಜಾಬ್ಸ್ಗೆ ದೆರ್ ವಾಸ್ ನೋ ಸೆಕ್ಯೂರಿಟಿ ಫಾರ್ ದೋಸ್ ಜಾಬ್ಸ್. ದೇ ವರ್ ಹೈಯರ್ಡ್, ದೇ ಕುಡ್ ಬಿ ಫೈರ್ಡ್, ದೇರ್ ವಾಸ್ ಆಲ್ವೇಸ್ ಅ ರಿಸರ್ವ್ ಫೋರ್ಸ್. For those who want to know more about how capitalist industrial economy works, should read Karl Marx in his Capitalist Manifesto. Communist Manifesto, sorry. People were assured full employment. ಇವ್ರು ಬಂದು we will assure you employment. ಯಾಕೆ ಅಂದರೆ these were the people who were coming from labor class ಇಂದ ಬಂದಂತಹ ಪಾರ್ಟಿ ಇದು. ಅವರ ಇಂಟ್ರೆಸ್ಟ್ನ ಕಾಯ್ದುಕೊಳ್ಳುವಂತಹ ಪಾರ್ಟಿ ಆಗಿದ್ರಿಂದ people they were assured full employment and public health benefits. ಇನ್ನೊಂದು ಏನಂದರೆ ಕಾಸು ಕೊಟ್ಟರೆ ಮಾತ್ರ ಹೆಲ್ತ್ ಕೇರ್ ಅನ್ನೋ ಹಾಗೆ ಇರ್ಕೂಡ್ದು. ಇಟ್ ಶುಡ್ ಬಿ public health care should be available to everyone irrespective of their economic status. ಸೊ ಇದೆಲ್ಲ ವೆಲ್ಫೇರ್ ಸ್ಟೇಟ್ ಅಂದರೆ ಕಲ್ಯಾಣ, ಜನರ ಕಲ್ಯಾಣವೇ ದೊಡ್ಡದು ಅಂತ ಸ್ಟೇಟ್ ಕನ್ಸೆಪ್ಟ್ ಅಥವಾ ಅದರ ಆಬ್ಜೆಕ್ಟಿವ್ ಅಥವಾ ಏಮ್ ಮಾಡಿಕೊಂಡ್ರೆ ವಾಟ್ ಹ್ಯಾಪನ್ಸ್ ಇಸ್ ಇಟ್ ವಿಲ್ ಹ್ಯಾವ್ ಟು ಇಂಟರ್ಫಿಯರ್ in the economic affairs and also sometimes go against the interests of the capitalist class. ಕ್ಯಾಪಿಟಲಿಸ್ಟ್ ಅಥವಾ ದುಡ್ಡಿರುವಂತಹ ಜನ ಏನಿರ್ತಾರೆ ಅವರ ಇಂಟ್ರೆಸ್ಟ್ಗೆ ವಿರುದ್ಧವಾಗಿ ಜನರ ಕಲ್ಯಾಣ ಸಾಧ್ಯ ಆಗತ್ತೆ. ಇಫ್ you kind of believe that one shouldn't interfere in the market, then the people who are already rich will remain rich or will become richer. This is and that particular process needs to be arrested if you need to form a welfare state. So government needs to interfere there. ಅವ್ರು ಬಂದು ಅವರ ಅಜೆಂಡಾಲಿ ವಾಟ್ ದೇ ಅಶ್ಯೂರ್ಡ್ ಪೀಪಲ್ ಇಸ್ they'll get full employment, public health benefits, expansion of social security system to provide welfare for people from cradle to grave. Social security system is a concept in many western countries. ಅಂದರೆ social security ಇತ್ತು ಅಂದರೆ then you become a full citizen of that country ಅಂತ. That means you are covered for your health care, for other privileges such as access to public health, public education, public goods, public services, employment opportunities. ಸೊ ಈ ಥರ ಸೋಷಿಯಲ್ ಸೆಕ್ಯೂರಿಟಿ ಅಂದರೆ ನಿಮ್ಮ ಸಾಮಾಜಿಕ ಭದ್ರತೆ ಕೊಡುವಂಥದ್ದು. ಅಂದರೆ ಪರ್ಸನ್ ವಿಲ್ ಬಿ ಏಬಲ್ ಟು ಲಿವ್ ಇನ್ ದಟ್ ಸೊಸೈಟಿ ವಿತ್ ಡಿಗ್ನಿಟಿ ಆ್ಯಂಡ್ ಈಕ್ವಾಲಿಟಿ. ಅಂದರೆ ಒಂದು ಮಟ್ಟಗಿನ ಈಕ್ವಾಲಿಟಿ ಎಸ್ಟಾಬ್ಲಿಷ್ ಮಾಡುತ್ತೆ. ಇಟ್ ಬ್ರಿಡ್ಜಸ್ ದ ಇನ್ಇಕ್ವಾಲಿಟಿ that is inevitable if capitalist interests are guarded. Private business and industry brought under public government through nationalization. ಡ್ಯೂರಿಂಗ್ ದಿಸ್ ಟೈಮ್ ಪ್ರೈವೇಟ್ ಇಂಡಸ್ಟ್ರೀಸ್, ಕೆಲವು ಇಂಡಸ್ಟ್ರೀಸ್ನ ನ್ಯಾಷನಲೈಸ್ ಮಾಡಿದ್ರು, ರಾಷ್ಟ್ರೀಕರಣಗೊಳಿಸಿದ್ರು. ಅಂದರೆ ಏನರ್ಥ, ಪ್ರೈವೇಟ್ ಇಂಟ್ರೆಸ್ಟ್ನ ಪೂರ್ತಿಯಾಗಿ ತೆಗೆದುಬಿಟ್ಟು, ಸೇ ಫಾರ್ ಎಕ್ಸಾಂಪಲ್ ರೈಲ್ವೇಸ್, ಈ ಥರದ್ದು ಸ್ವಲ್ಪ ತುಂಬ ಇಂಪಾರ್ಟೆಂಟ್ ಇಂಡಸ್ಟ್ರೀಸ್ ಏನಿರುತ್ತೆ ಅದು ಯಾವುದೋ ಒಬ್ಬ ಪ್ರೈವೇಟ್ ಓನರ್ ಕೈ ಕೆಳಗಡೆ ಇರಬಾರ್ದು. ಯಾಕೆ ಅಂದರೆ ದಟ್ ಪರ್ಸನ್ ವಿಲ್ ಬಿಗಿನ್ ಟು ವೀಲ್ಡ್ unnecessary influence on the government. ಅದು ಬೇಕಾಗಿರಲ್ಲ. ಸೊ ದ ಗವರ್ಮೆಂಟ್ ಶುಡ್ ಓನ್ ಇಟ್ ಕಂಪ್ಲೀಟ್ಲಿ ಸೊ ದಟ್ ದೇರ್ ಇಸ್ ನೋ ಸ್ಕೋಪ್ ಫಾರ್ ಲಾಬಿಂಗ್ ಫ್ರಮ್ ದೋಸ್ ಪ್ರೈವೇಟ್ ಓನರ್ಸ್. ಸೊ ಹಾಗೆಯೇ ಇಲ್ಲಿ ಪಬ್ಲಿಕ್ ಗವರ್ಮೆಂಟಲ್ಲಿ ಪ್ರೈವೇಟ್ ಬಿಸ್ನೆಸ್, ಕೆಲವು ಇಂಪಾರ್ಟೆಂಟ್ ಪ್ರೈವೇಟ್ ಬಿಸ್ನೆಸ್ ಮತ್ತು ಇಂಡಸ್ಟ್ರಿನ they were brought under public government through nationalization, ರಾಷ್ಟ್ರೀಕರಣಗೊಳಿಸೋದ್ರ ಮೂಲಕ. The same thing happens. Whichever government has the socialist agenda will have to do this. ಯಾಕೆ ಅಂದರೆ they ultimately don't believe that the private interests are the safest, the private owners are the safest people to have such important things under. But of course we all know that socialist governments have their own problems, and sometimes it also leads to government doesn't really mean caring for the people. Governmentally inside corruption ಜಾಸ್ತಿ ಆಗ್ತಾ there is a possibility that industries, there is no easy solution out of this. That's what I want to kind of highlight here. Nationalized industries included the Bank of England. So look at the kind of industries and the commerce that they are nationalizing. Bank of England, which is banking service. Coal mines, avatina energy requirements, because railways were the big thing. This is the time when electricity was not still a big thing, and it was not as that's not the go-to source for energy. ಒಂದು ನೇಷನಲ್ಲಿ ಎನರ್ಜಿ ರಿಕ್ವೈರ್ಮೆಂಟ್ಸ್ ಏನಿದೆ, ಇವತ್ತಿನ ಎನರ್ಜಿ ರಿಕ್ವೈರ್ಮೆಂಟ್ಸ್ ಏನಿದೆ ಅಂದರೆ ಪೆಟ್ರೋಲ್ and to an extent electricity. So these are the main sources of energy. ಇದನ್ನು ಹೇಗೆ ಪಡ್ಕೊಳ್ತೀವಿ, ಈ ಥರ ಇಂಡಸ್ಟ್ರೀಸ್ ಯಾರ ಕೈ ಕೆಳಗಡೆ ಇದೆ, they will have a unequal influence on the government and its policies. So the nationalize ಮಾಡ್ಬಿಟ್ರೆ then it remains under the government, and as long as the government works for the welfare of the general good, then the interest will also be safeguarded, and all these benefits will reach out to everyone, every individual in the society. So Bank of England, coal mines, avatina energy, the big thing. Now coal is not the energy source. It's not the most important. Now ಎಲ್ಲಾನು ನಡೀತಿರೋದು ಆಯಿಲ್ ಮೇಲೆ. ಆಯಿಲ್ನ ಲಿಕ್ವಿಡ್ ಗೋಲ್ಡ್ ಅಂತ ಅದಕ್ಕೆ ಹೇಳ್ತಾರೆ. ಅಂದರೆ ಇಟ್ಸ್ ಆಸ್ the Gulf countries became important mainly due to their oil reserves. So railways, iron and steel industry. So look at the kind of industries that were nationalized, or commerces like banking services ಒಂದು ಗವರ್ಮೆಂಟ್ ಹತ್ರ ಉಳ್ಕೊಳ್ಳೋದು ತುಂಬ ಇಂಪಾರ್ಟೆಂಟ್. ಈ ಥರ ಬಿಕಾಸ್ ಆಫ್ ದೇರ್ ವೆಲ್ಫೇರ್ ರಿಸ್ಟ್ ಅಜೆಂಡಾ, ಈ ವೆಲ್ಫೇರಿಸಮ್ ಬಂದ ತಕ್ಷಣ, socialism ಬಂದ ತಕ್ಷಣ, you think about every individual in the society, especially those individuals who cannot afford those services or access those services, ಆ ಸರ್ವಿಸಸ್ ಮತ್ತು ಗೂಡ್ಸ್ ಅವರ ಲೈಫ್ ಕೂಡ ಚೆನ್ನಾಗಿರಬೇಕು ಅನ್ನೋದು ಸೋಷಲಿಸ್ಟ್ ಪಾರ್ಟಿಯ ಅಜೆಂಡಾ ಆದ ತಕ್ಷಣ ಈ ಥರದೆಲ್ಲ ಎಕನಾಮಿಕ್ ಪಾಲಿಸೀಸ್ ಬರ್ತಾ ಹೋಗುತ್ತೆ. ಆ್ಯಂಡ್ ಇಟ್ ಇಂಪ್ಯಾಕ್ಟ್ಸ್ ದ ವೇ ಪೀಪಲ್ ಥಿಂಕ್. All of a sudden, if the people who were denied access to education, for example, are given education, then they think that it's not, there's nothing inherently wrong about them to not get that. Their birth status or where they are in the society is not of any important consequence to their ability to access these things. They also feel they deserve it, and it's important that every individual does that. It's not okay to have a few people sit and lord over all the resources or the wealth of the country or a nation. The wealth needs to be redistributed, and socialist idea or agenda and the welfare state, which is contingent to that particular idea, is ಇಂಪಾರ್ಟೆಂಟ್. ಸೊ ಅಲ್ಲಿಂದ ಅಂದರೆ ಡೆಮಾಕ್ರಸಿ ಪೂರ್ತಿಯಾಗಿ ಎಸ್ಟಾಬ್ಲಿಷ್ ಆಗೋದಕ್ಕೆ ಈ ಬ್ರಿಟಿಷ್ ಸೊಸೈಟಿಯಲ್ಲಿ ಇದ್ದಂತಹ ಕ್ಲಾಸ್ ಬೇಸ್ಡ್ ಡಿವಿಷನ್ ಆ್ಯಂಡ್ ಇನ್ಇಕ್ವಾಲಿಟಿ, ಸೊ ದ ವೈಡ್ ಗ್ಯಾಪ್, ಸ್ಪೆಷಲಿ ದ ಎಕನಾಮಿಕ್ ಗ್ಯಾಪ್ ದಟ್ ಎಕ್ಸಿಸ್ಟೆಡ್ ಬಿಟ್ವೀನ್ ಪೀಪಲ್ ಹೂ ಹ್ಯಾಡ್ ಮನಿ, ದ haves so called, and the have nots, was bridged to an extent through a lot of these government policy initiatives, which were undertaken by the Labour government during its stint between 1945 and 1951, which is almost like 6 years of rule. But there were, of course, problems of Labour government. Welfare state ಕಾಲಿಡ್ತಿರೋ ಹಾಗೆ ಇಟ್ಸ್ ನಾಟ್ ಈಸಿ ಟು ಕೈಂಡ್ ಆಫ್ ಸಸ್ಟೈನ್ ದಿಸ್, ಬಿಕಾಸ್ ಹೌಸಿಂಗ್ ಆ್ಯಂಡ್ ಇನ್ಫ್ಲೇಷನ್ ಹ್ಯಾಪನ್. ನನಗೆ ಉದ್ದೇಶ ಒಳ್ಳೆಯದೇ ಇರ್ಬೋದು, ವೆಲ್ತ್ನ ಒಡೆದು ಹಂಚಬೇಕು ಅನ್ನೋಂಥದ್ದು, ಆದರೆ ಒಡೆದು ಹಂಚಕ್ಕೆ ಆ ವೆಲ್ತ್ನ ಸಸ್ಟೈನ್ ಮಾಡೋದು ಹೇಗೆ? ಹಂಚಿದ ವೆಲ್ತ್ಗೆ ಡಿಸ್ಟ್ರಿಬ್ಯೂಷನ್ ಆಫ್ ವೆಲ್ತ್ ಡಸಂಟ್ ಮೀನ್ ಕ್ರಿಯೇಷನ್ ಆಫ್ ವೆಲ್ತ್. ಸೊ ಆಸ್ ಲಾಂಗ್ ಎಸ್ ಪೀಪಲ್ ಹೂ ಆರ್ ಮೇಕಿಂಗ್ ಪ್ರಾಫಿಟ್ ರಿಮೇನ್ ಇನ್ ದ ಸೊಸೈಟಿ, there is constant wealth generation. When it is redistributed, right, the wealth's given, not generated. So in that case, socialist agenda creates its own problems. So there is no economic policy which is immune to problems. Problems will be generated. So the problems that Labour government had to face included housing and inflation. Prices of goods severely shot up due to shortage of supply. This was immediately following war, 1945 war period agidrinda the supply was there was a shortage in supply. Supply was not sufficient to fulfill the demands of people, which very naturally increase the prices of goods, and it caused inflation ಅಂದ್ರೆ ಹಣದುಬ್ಬರ. ಅಂದ್ರೆ ಎಷ್ಟೇ ದುಡ್ಡು ಕೊಟ್ರು the amount of money that you give and what you can get out of it, there will be a huge gap there. That's exactly what inflation is. ನಾನು 10 ರೂಪಾಯಿ ಕೊಟ್ಟು ಕೊಂಡ್ಕೊಳ್ಳೋದು ಬೇರೆ, 20 ರೂಪಾಯಿ ಕೊಟ್ಟು ಕೊಂಡ್ಕೊಳ್ಳೋದ್ರು ಬೇರೆ. ಮೊದಲು 5 ರೂಪಾಯಿಗೆ ಸಿಗ್ತಾ ಇದ್ದಿದ್ದು ಇವತ್ತಿಗೆ 100 ರೂಪಾಯಿಗೂ ಸಿಗದೆ ಇರುವಂಥದ್ದು ಇನ್ಫ್ಲೇಷನ್ನ ಕಾನ್ಸಿಕ್ವೆನ್ಸ್. Huge amounts spent by the country on defense and social services. ವಾರ್ ಹಿಂದೆ ಟೈಮ್ನಲ್ಲಿ ಅಥವಾ ವಾರ್ ನಡೀತಾ ಇರುವಾಗ major chunk of government budget needs to be diverted to defense and other social services. There was an increase in prices led to demand for higher wages with increased costs of production and prices of goods, a vicious cycle. So what happens is if you cannot buy things that you used to buy for 5 rupees even after paying 100 rupees, you will demand more wages. ನನಗೆ ಜಾಸ್ತಿ ಸಂಬಳ ಬೇಕು ಅಂತ ಪೀಪಲ್ ವಿಲ್ ಡಿಮಾಂಡ್, ಅಥವಾ ನನಗೆ ದಿನಗೂಲಿ ಜಾಸ್ತಿ ಬೇಕು ಅಂತ people who are working, they will demand, and that will again increase the cost of production. So ಅವರಿಗೆ ಜಾಸ್ತಿ ಮಾಡಿದರೆ ಇವ್ರಿಗೂ ಯಾರಿಗೆ ಪ್ರೈಸಸ್ ಆಫ್ ದ ಗೂಡ್ಸ್ ಆಲ್ಸೋ ನೀಡ್ ಟು ಬಿ ಶಾರ್ಟ್ ಅಪ್. ಆ್ಯಂಡ್ ಫೈನಲಿ ಇದು ಹೆಂಗೆ ಅಂದರೆ ಹಣ ಜಾಸ್ತಿ ಕೊಡಬೇಕು ನಾವು ಕೊಂಡ್ಕೊಳ್ಳಿಕ್ಕೆ, ಅದರಿಂದ ನಮಗೆ ಸಂಬಳ ಜಾಸ್ತಿ ಮಾಡಿ ಅಂತಾರೆ. ಸಂಬಳ ಜಾಸ್ತಿ ಮಾಡಿದರೆ ದೆನ್ ಅಗೇನ್ ಪ್ರೊಡಕ್ಷನ್ ಕಾಸ್ಟ್ ವಿಲ್ ಅಗೇನ್ ಇನ್ಕ್ರೀಸ್. ಇವರಿಗೆ ಒಂಥರ ವಿಷವರ್ತುಲ ವಿಷ ಸೈಕಲ್ ಅಂತಾರಲ್ಲ ಆ ಥರ ಆಗೋಗುತ್ತೆ. ದಿಸ್ ಇಸ್ ದ ಥಿಂಗ್. ಎನಿ ಫಸ್ಟ್ ವರ್ಲ್ಡ್ ಕಂಟ್ರಿ, ಅದಕ್ಕೇ ಫಸ್ಟ್ ವರ್ಲ್ಡ್ ಕಂಟ್ರೀಸಲ್ಲಿ ಥೌಸಂಡ್ಸಲ್ಲಿ ಡೀಲ್ ಮಾಡ್ತಾರೆ. ನಮ್ಮಲ್ಲಿ ಲಕ್ಷಗಳ ಗಟ್ಟಲೆ ಮನಿ ಇದ್ರೂ ವಿ ಆರ್ ನಾಟ್ an economy that is we especially third world economies ಇವತ್ತಿಗೂ ಕೂಡ ಇನ್ಫ್ಲೇಷನ್ ಕೆಳಗಡೆನೆ ಬದುಕ್ತಿದೆ. ನಮ್ಮಲ್ಲಿ 2 ಲಕ್ಷ ಸಂಬಳ ಇದ್ರೂ sometimes it's not enough to lead a very comfortable life, but thousands of dollars are enough kind of thing. General shortage of food in the world, high price of meat, sugar and wheat. So since a lot of investment went into defense and other military services, there was a general shortage of food in the world. The prices of the meat went up, prices of meat, sugar and other daily essentials, staple food essentials ಅಂತ ಏನು ಹೇಳ್ತೀವಿ ಅದರ ಎಲ್ಲ ಪ್ರೈಸ್ ಮೇಲೆ ಹೊರಟೋಗುತ್ತೆ. ಆ್ಯಂಡ್ ಅಫ್ಕೋರ್ಸ್ ಇನ್ಫ್ಲೇಷನ್ ಇಸ್ ಅ ನ್ಯಾಚುರಲ್ ರಿಸಲ್ಟ್ ಆಫ್ ಆಲ್ ದೀಸ್ ಥಿಂಗ್ಸ್. ರಿಟರ್ನ್ ಆಫ್ ಸೆವರಲ್ ಸರ್ವಿಸ್ ಮೆನ್ ಟು ಇಂಗ್ಲೆಂಡ್ ಆಫ್ಟರ್ ದ ವಾರ್. ಸೊ ಪ್ರತಿಯೊಬ್ಬರು ವಾರಲ್ಲಿ ಯಾರಿದ್ರು ಅವರೆಲ್ಲರೂ ಒಂದೊಂದ್ಸಲ ಡಿಸೇಬಲ್ಡ್ ಆಗಿ ಬರ್ತಾಯಿದ್ರು, ಇನ್ನೊಂದ್ಸಲ ಪೂರ್ತಿಯಾಗಿ ಬರ್ತಾಯಿದ್ರು. ಬಟ್ ದ ಮೊಮೆಂಟ್ ದೇ ರಿಟರ್ನ್ from the war front, it becomes an obligation or a duty or a responsibility of the government to provide them with some employment opportunity or to safeguard their livelihood, because after all they have fought in the war for the nation, and the government can't leave there or abandon them to fend for themselves. So they had to be first given employment and put in proper jobs, and only later the jobs that were available, and government was really struggling to provide these young men employment. Forget the people who were not part of the military service. Or easy availability of work in factories due to increase in demand in peace times but scarcity of labor. So this was also the time when the jobs were available, especially the factory jobs. ಇನ್ಕ್ರೀಸ್ ಆಗ್ತಿದ್ದ ಹಾಗೆ ಡಿಮಾಂಡ್ ಪ್ರೊಡಕ್ಷನ್ನಲ್ಲಿ there was a need for labor. ಆದರೆ many people were at the war front. The people who returned sometimes were disabled to go and join labor force in factories, and women sometimes offered their labor here. But still, it was a very strange situation where there was unemployment on the one hand, there was also a scarcity of labor on the other. People who could be employable, people who could be used to produce something. So this was a strange situation for the government. So destruction of several houses. At the same time, the infrastructure, housing infrastructure was destroyed because of the bombing of many cities. So one the mattake many cities were thoroughly revamped, refurbished and restructured, which required huge amounts of money again, and these are basic needs: food, shelter, the food and shelter are basic needs, and housing is something that cannot be neglected. And people lost their houses not because they were sold, because bombs came and destroyed their habitation. So Labour Party overall had huge problems to face. We learned in the previous session that at the same time the colonial empire, the British Empire, where sun never set, it collapsed, and there was increase in the demand for independence by several colonies of the British Empire, with India and Pakistan gaining independence in 1947. Ceylon and Burma were given independence in 1948. Republic of Ireland, which is part of the United Kingdom, which was just contingent to their empire. So their nation, even they need to be conceded independence in 1949, and 1961 South Africa was declared an independent nation. So the holdings that they had in Africa and Asia, for example the British Empire, those holdings need to be given up. So ಅಲ್ಲಿಂದ ಬರ್ತಿದ್ದಂಥ ಎಲ್ಲ ಆದಾಯ ನಿಲ್ತಾ ಹೋಯಿತು. Adoption of a policy of liberalism towards the colonies by Britain and gradual reduction of empire. It was inevitable that the empire got reduced because it was unsustainable, and the Britain cannot leech these colonies for its own benefit. So dropping of the usage of the word, I mean, after a point in time, we also see they dropped the word dominion in 1947. So instead of all the colonial setup or the process, we now have Commonwealth, which includes all territories which were once ruled by the British, irrespective of their status of independence, whether they are independent or not. Now they are part of Commonwealth. It's a Commonwealth's not a place where you get money or you can directly get tax, but an organization which just reminds you of the colonial period and its aftermath. It's not an economic organization. It won't generate wealth, it won't generate income. So it's not something that Great Britain can rely on. After the Second World War, so even when the world was reeling under the effects of the Second World War, it was not as if the war was completely over. Britain lost its power as the most important global uh, player in the world, but its place was taken over by two nations, America and Russia. It and they both were starting another sort of war. A war and its shadow was not completely removed from the world. There was mutual distrust between the Eastern Bloc and the Western Bloc. ಯುರೋಪ್ನಲ್ಲಿ ಈಸ್ಟರ್ನ್ ಬ್ಲಾಕ್ ಅಂಡ್ ವೆಸ್ಟರ್ನ್ ಬ್ಲಾಕ್ ಅಂತ ಎರಡು ಬ್ಲಾಕ್ಸ್ ಆಗೋಯ್ತು. ಈಸ್ಟರ್ನ್ ಬ್ಲಾಕ್ ಅಂದರೆ ಈ ಯುನೋ ಕ್ರೊವೇಷಿಯಾ, ಈ ರೊಮ್ಯಾನಿಯಾ, ಓಕೆ, ಈ ಥರದ್ದೆಲ್ಲ ಕಂಟ್ರೀಸ್ ವಿಚ್ ಹ್ಯಾಸ್ ವೆರಿ ಕಮ್ಯುನಿಸ್ಟ್ ಅಥವಾ ಸೋಷಿಯಲಿಸ್ಟ್ ಲೀನಿಂಗ್ಸ್ ಇರುವಂತಹ ಸ್ಟೇಟು ಅಗೇನ್ಸ್ಟ್ ದ ವೆಸ್ಟರ್ನ್ ಯುರೋಪಿಯನ್ ನೇಷನ್ಸ್ ಸಚ್ as England, Spain, Italy, Germany. These were all the ವೆಸ್ಟರ್ನ್ ಬ್ಲಾಕ್ ಕಂಟ್ರೀಸ್. ಸೊ ಇವುಗಳ ಮಧ್ಯೆನೇ ಯುರೋಪ್ನಲ್ಲೇನೆ ಎರಡು ರೀತಿ ಡಿವಿಷನ್ ಆಗ್ತಾ ಹೋಯಿತು ಫಾರ್ ವಾಟ್ ದೇ ಸ್ಟುಡ್ ಫಾರ್. ದ ಕೋಲ್ಡ್ ವಾರ್ ವಾಸ್ ಅನ್ ಐಡಿಯಾಲಜಿಕಲ್ ವಾರ್ಫೇರ್. ಅಂದರೆ ಒಂದು ಐಡಿಯಾ ಬೇಸ್ಡ್ ಯುದ್ಧ ಆಗಿತ್ತದು. ಒಂದು ಕಡೆ ಯು ಹ್ಯಾಡ್ ಕ್ಯಾಪಿಟಲಿಸಮ್, ಒಂದು ಕಡೆ ಯು ಹ್ಯಾಡ್ ಕಮ್ಯುನಿಸಮ್, ಸೋಷಿಯಲಿಸಮ್ ಡಾಮಿನೇಟಿಂಗ್. ರಷ್ಯಾ ಸ್ಟುಡ್ ಫಾರ್ ಕಮ್ಯುನಿಸಮ್ ಮತ್ತು ಸೋಷಿಯಲಿಸ್ಟ್ ಐಡಿಯಾಸ್ಗೆ. ಅಂದರೆ ಎಲ್ಲರ ಪ್ರಗತಿ ಆಗಬೇಕು, ಗೌರ್ಮೆಂಟ್ಗಳ ಕೈ ಕೆಳಗಡೆನೆ ಎಲ್ಲ ಇರಬೇಕು ಅಂತ. ಕ್ಯಾಪಿಟಲಿಸಮ್ ವಾಸ್ ಪ್ರೈವೇಟ್ ಇಂಟ್ರೆಸ್ಟ್ ಇರುವಂಥವ್ರು ಅಥವಾ ದುಡ್ಡು ಇರುವಂಥವ್ರು, ದೋಸ್ ಪೀಪಲ್ ಹೂ ಹ್ಯಾಡ್ ಕ್ಯಾಪಿಟಲ್, ದೇ ಬಿಲೀವ್ಡ್ ಇನ್ ಫ್ರೀ ಮಾರ್ಕೆಟ್, ಲೆಸ್ ಗವರ್ಮೆಂಟ್ ಇಂಟರ್ಫಿಯರೆನ್ಸ್, ಮೋರ್ ಫ್ರೀಡಮ್ ಫಾರ್ ಪೀಪಲ್ ಟು ಕಂಡಕ್ಟ್ ಅಫೇರ್ಸ್ ಆಸ್ ದೇ ಡೀಮ್ ಫಿಟ್. So this was the idea, with USA standing for capitalism and Russia standing for communism. You have this very strong ideological warfare. ಅದೇ ಇದರಲ್ಲಿ ಆಮೇಲೆ ದೇ ಗಾಟ್ ಇನ್ ಟು ಆರ್ಮ್ಸ್ ರೇಸ್ ಅಂದರೆ ಇವರು ಮಿಸೈಲ್ ಮಾಡಿದ್ರು ಅಂತ ಅವ್ರು ಮಿಸೈಲ್ ಮಾಡ್ಕೊಳ್ಳೋದು, ಇವ್ರು ನ್ಯೂಕ್ಲಿಯರ್ ವೆಪನ್ ಮಾಡ್ಕೊಂಡ್ರು ಅಂತ ಅವ್ರು ನ್ಯೂಕ್ಲಿಯರ್ ವೆಪನ್ ಮಾಡ್ಕೊಳ್ಳೋದು. ಆ್ಯಂಡ್ ಪೀಪಲ್ ವರ್ ಆಲ್ಸೋ ಕೈಂಡ್ ಆಫ್ associating with them, not associating with them, or associating just with Russia or just with America, or countries such as India, which gained independence just then, didn't want to get involved in this politics at all. So they adopted a non-alignment policy. So ಈ ಥರದ್ದು ಕೋಲ್ಡ್ ವಾರ್ ಪ್ರಪಂಚನ ಎರಡು ಬ್ಲಾಕ್ಸ್ ಆಗಿ ಡಿವೈಡ್ ಮಾಡ್ತು. ಒಂದು ರಷ್ಯಾ ಕಡೆ, ಇನ್ನೊಂದು ಅಮೆರಿಕಾ ಕಡೆ, ವಿಚ್ ಅಮೆರಿಕಾ ಸ್ಟುಡ್ ಫಾರ್ ಕ್ಯಾಪಿಟಲಿಸ್ಟ್ ಐಡಿಯಾಸ್ ಆ್ಯಂಡ್ ರಷ್ಯಾ ಸ್ಟುಡ್ ಫಾರ್ socialist and communist ideas, and Britain became part of the Western Bloc, which stood for democracy and capitalist mode of economy. So democracy ಮತ್ತೆ capitalist mode of economyಗೆ ಬ್ರಿಟನ್ ಕೂಡ ಸಪೋರ್ಟ್ ಮಾಡಲಿಕ್ಕೆ ಶುರುವಾಯಿತು, ಈವನ್ ದೋ ಇಟ್ ಹ್ಯಾಡ್ ಇಟ್ಸ್ ಓನ್ ಸೋಷಲಿಸ್ಟ್ ಅಜೆಂಡಾ. Social life in post-war England, 1940s and 1950s. What was social life like? So we have already covered this. There was a social leveling up, ಅಂದರೆ class inequality reduce ಆಗ್ತಾ ಆಗ್ತಾ, reduction of class consciousness to a great degree because of similar experiences of soldiers from different classes in terms of sharing the ಟ್ರೆಂಚಸ್ ಬುಲೆಟ್ಸ್. ಸೊ ಟ್ರೆಂಚಸ್ ಮತ್ತು ಬುಲೆಟ್ಸ್ ಮೂಲಕ ಹೊಡೆದಾಡ್ತಿದ್ದಂತಹ ಜನರು, ದೇ ಹ್ಯಾಡ್ when an aristocratic person had to fight in war alongside a farmer's son, there was nothing called as class there. Both of them faced the ultimate reality of life, that is death, and it reduced the class inequality to a great extent. And also there was mass production of clothes, which made it easy for anyone to follow fashion and lifestyle choices of aristocratic classes. Appearance ಮೂಲಕ distinguish ಮಾಡ್ತಾ ಇದ್ರೆ, when you distinguish classes on the base of their appearance, on the basis of their appearance, this was not no longer the case anymore, due to the mass production of clothes during industrial revolution. And then educational institutions, which were the places where people from good and wealthy homes went to, such as Oxford and Cambridge, opened their doors to sons of workers, miners, etc., which paved the way for a creation of a classless society. ಇದೇ ಸಮಯದಲ್ಲಿ ಪ್ರೊಫೆಷನಲ್ ಕ್ಲಾಸ್ ಕೂಡ ಎಮರ್ಜ್ ಆಗುತ್ತೆ. People, the class of lawyers, doctors, and other sorts of upper middle class life. Sorry. So the condition of classes in post-war England. If England is a class-based society, so India caste-based society ಆದರೆ, England caste-based society ಆದರೆ, ಅಲ್ಲಿ ಯಾವ ರೀತಿ ಇತ್ತು classes after post-World War. So it generally meant better condition for working class people after the war, favored by Labour government, which levied heavy taxes ಆನ್ ದಿ ಅಪ್ಪರ್ ಆ್ಯಂಡ್ ಮಿಡಲ್ ಕ್ಲಾಸ್. ಅಪ್ಪರ್ ಆ್ಯಂಡ್ ಮಿಡಲ್ ಕ್ಲಾಸ್ಗೆ ಟ್ಯಾಕ್ಸ್ ಮೂಲಕ ಇನ್ಕಮ್ ಜನರೇಟ್ ಮಾಡೋಕ್ಕೆ ಶುರು ಮಾಡಿ, ಇಟ್ ಕೈಂಡ್ ಆಫ್ ವೆಲ್ಫೇರಿಸ್ಟ್ ಅಜೆಂಡಾ ಅಂದರೆ ಇದೆ. ಒಂದು ಕಡೆಗೆ ಟ್ಯಾಕ್ಸ್ ಹಾಕಿ ಇನ್ನೊಂದು ಕಡೆಗೆ ಆ ವೆಲ್ತ್ನ ರೀಡಿಸ್ಟ್ರಿಬ್ಯೂಟ್ ಮಾಡುವಂಥದ್ದು. ಸೊ ದ ಲೇಬರ್ ಪಾರ್ಟಿ ವೆನ್ ಇಟ್ ಕೇಮ್ ಇನ್ ಟು ಪವರ್ ಹ್ಯಾಡ್ ಟು ಡೂ ದಿಸ್ ಇನ್ ಆರ್ಡರ್ ಟು ಬ್ರಿಡ್ಜ್ ದ inequality that was existing between the classes. There was domination of the upper class in certain areas. So it's still the upper class people were dominant in many areas, such as higher civil service. Civil service ಅಥವಾ ಗೌರ್ಮೆಂಟಲ್ಲಿ ಇಂಪಾರ್ಟೆಂಟ್ ಪೊಸಿಷನ್ಸ್ನಲ್ಲಿ ಇನ್ನು ಹಿಂದೆ ಇದ್ದಂತಹ ಓಲ್ಡ್ ಕ್ಲಾಸ್ ಪೀಪಲ್ ಅಂದರೆ ಅರಿಸ್ಟೋಕ್ರೆಟಿಕ್ ಕ್ಲಾಸ್ ಪೀಪಲ್ಲೇ ಇದ್ದರು. ಶಿಫ್ಟ್ ಇನ್ ದ ಡಾಮಿನೆಂಟ್ ಆಕ್ಯುಪೇಷನ್ ಫ್ರಮ್ ಪಾಲಿಟಿಕ್ಸ್ ಟು ಜರ್ನಲಿಸಮ್, ಪಬ್ಲಿಷಿಂಗ್, ಫಿಲ್ಮ್ಸ್, ರೇಡಿಯೋ, ಟೆಲಿವಿಷನ್, ಅಡ್ವರ್ಟೈಸಿಂಗ್, ಈ ಥರ ಎಷ್ಟೆಷ್ಟೋ ಜಾಬ್ಸ್ ಕ್ರಿಯೇಟ್ ಆಗ್ತಾ ಆಗ್ತಾ ಇವುಗಳು ಸಮ್ ಆಫ್ ದೆಮ್ ವೆಂಟ್ ಇನ್ ಟು ದೋಸ್ ಪ್ಲೇಸಸ್ ಎಸ್ ವೆಲ್. ಅಂದರೆ ಸ್ಟಿಲ್ ದೀಸ್ ಆರ್ ದ ನ್ಯೂ ಜಾಬ್ಸ್, ಬಟ್ ದೀಸ್ ನ್ಯೂ ಜಾಬ್ಸ್ ಕಂಟ್ರೋಲ್ಡ್ ಹೌ society was envisioned, how it functioned, how ideas were framed for it. Because look at the shift that is happening from politics in the journalism ಹೋಗ್ತಿದ್ದಾರೆ ಅಂದರೆ media has heavy influence on how government forms and policies. So publishing, journalism, films, radio, ಅವತ್ತಿನ media industry ಏನಿದೆ ಅಲ್ಲಿಗೆ ಒಂದು ಮಟ್ಟಕ್ಕೆ ಮೈಗ್ರೇಷನ್ ಆಗುತ್ತೆ ಫ್ರಮ್ ದ ಓಲ್ಡ್ ಆಕ್ಯುಪೇಷನಲ್ ಬೇಸ್ ಆಫ್ politics. The condition of the working class, despite opportunities for moving upwards, they remained within the boundaries of the class. So mobility idru saha, since education institutions were now open and anybody could access jobs, still even after all these reforms, a section of the working class society remained working class because it's not easy to get out of poverty. So ಏನೇ upward mobility ಕೊಟ್ಟರೂ ಸಹ after a point reservation ಇಲ್ಲದೆ it's very difficult to kind of produce mobility. ಯಾಕೆ ಅಂದರೆ they had to compete with already privileged class from before. ಸೊ ಹಿಂದೆ ಇದ್ದಂಥ ಕ್ಲಾಸ್ ಏನಿತ್ತು ಅವ್ರ ಜೊತೆ ಇವರು ಕಾಂಪೀಟ್ ಮಾಡುವಂಥ ಸಂದರ್ಭ ಬರುತ್ತೆ. ಸೊ ದಟ್ ಸ್ಟಾರ್ಟಿಂಗ್ ಲೈನ್ ಫಾರ್ ಅ ರೇಸ್ ದಟ್ ಈಸ್ ವೆರಿ ಡಿಫ್ರೆಂಟ್. ಒಬ್ಬರು ಈಗ 1000 ಮೀಟರ್ಸ್ ರೇಸ್ನ ಓಡುವಾಗ ಒಬ್ಬರಿಗೆ ಸ್ಟಾರ್ಟಿಂಗ್ ಲೈನು 400 ಮೀಟರ್ ಆಚೆ ಹಾಕಿ ಇನ್ನೊಬ್ಬರಿಗೆ 400 ಮೀಟರ್ ಹಿಂದೆ ಹಾಕಿದರೆ ಹೇಗಿರ್ತದೋ ಹಾಗೇನೆ. ಸೊ ಇನ್ ಸ್ಪೈಟ್ of these progressive economic social reforms in England, most people from the working and the poor class society, they remained within the framework or the boundaries of those classes. What was literature like during this period? So we have already learned about this. I briefly touch upon it. It's mostly a recap from the previous session. So you had important post-war writers in America and England both. George Orwell, J.D. Salinger, Hemingway, Golding, Greene and Auden. And you have a group of angry young men in the 1950s, in the decade of 1950s, who expressed their dissatisfaction with traditional English politics, education, and literature. So you also have literature reflecting the changes within English society. In writings by authors such as Sir C.P. Snow, Anthony Powell, etc., there's a sudden spurt or emergence of dramatists in America who became popular in England, such as Arthur Miller, Tennessee Williams, Eugene O'Neill, etc. Let's look at a few questions from the session. Britain joined the bloc, which bloc in the Cold World War? Eastern, Western, Northern, and Southern. The correct answer is Western. When did Labour Party come into power in England? 1941, 32, 45, 1951. The correct answer is 1945. Which of these is not a problem faced by the Labour government? Inflation, housing, shortage of food, onslaught of enemy nations. The correct answer is the onslaught of enemy nations. Britain gave independence to Ceylon and Burma in the year 1945, 44, 48, and 47. Correct answer is 1948. Which of these American dramatists did not become popular in the post-war Britain? Arthur Miller, Tennessee Williams, Eugene O'Neill, Amiri Baraka. Correct answer is Amiri Baraka. Let's summarize what we learned in this session. We spoke about the devastating effects of the two world wars on British society in terms of death, shattering of economy, loss of political supremacy over its empire, the assumption of power by the Labour Party, and Britain favoring the working class, ushering in a new welfare state. There was a beginning or in the reduction of the class inequality with measures taken by the Labour government to uplift working classes by providing equal opportunities in education and employment. Britain aligns with the Western Bloc in the post World War politics and supports the US of A in the Cold War. It's a kind of politics that espouses democracy and capitalist mode of production. Important post war writers include George Orwell, J.D. Salinger, Hemingway, Golding, Green, and Auden. With this, we come to the end of session 14. Thanks for listening.